Morning everyone. So I'm here in a two-part process this morning. First part is to talk to you about what management rights actually are, for those of you that might be a little bit less familiar with them. And the second part will be to come back and talk you through the purchase process and the related body corporate issues and so on afterwards, after you've heard about verifying the figures, finance and so on. So in terms of the first part of my presentation today, terms and concepts explained. So some of the more common ones you'll hear as you bounce around looking at management rights, what you actually purchase. Second part, contract terms. What do you sign when you're buying one of these things? What sort of protections do you have in terms of conditions, precedent, due diligence and so on? Doing the job, so probably getting past the purchase process there into a little bit more detail about what you actually need to do in one of these businesses, and to clear up any misconceptions very early. It's not a golf 3 days a week thing, particularly in this environment, which is, and by this environment I mean the world post-GFC, everyone's looking for value for money. So in a management rights sense, the more you're seen around the complex, the better off you're going to be. And then just some common misconceptions, some things that you might hear as you bounce around that aren't actually correct. But starting point, the big picture. So I've chosen, well actually Luke, our marketing manager who's out there, has chosen this wonderful building as our example. So what you have in a management rights context, the starting point really is that building at some stage, or that land, would have been a single block of dirt. What happens when you create a body corporate is that you create individual lots and common property. And the easiest way to describe it is that once you go inside someone's title, which in a building format plan is their front door, or in a standard format plan might be the edge of the property, that's their domain. And that's not necessarily your domain unless you're acting as agent for that owner. So it's not for you in a management rights context to go inside, provide concierge services, for want of a better phrase, get people's papers, clean their houses, all that sort of stuff. That's a completely separate service that you'd supply to lot owners that's outside the frame of management rights. But what your duties will relate to in a caretaking context is this common property. So in essence, it's sort of a process of exclusion where common property is anything that's not someone's lot. So in this example here, it's going to be the pool, it's going to be the surrounds of the pool, it's going to be our gazebo on the right-hand side there. When you go inside the building, it's going to be the foyer, it's going to be the hallways, it's going to be the roof, it's going to be the gardens and grounds with the trees and all those sorts of things. So common property is called that because it's owned in common in effect by all of the owners, and all of the owners have the right to use it. So when you're talking about a caretaking component of management rights, that's what your caretaking duties relate to. You'll be paid a fee to maintain and repair those things for the body corporate. Lot owners, and probably the easiest example to use here is a body corporate's like a company. So in a company you have shareholders. So you can BHP with 40,000 shareholders or whatever it is. You have a board of directors, and a body corporate's no different. The context is that in a body corporate context, all of the lot owners are in effect shareholders of that body corporate. So every year, everyone has a say at a general meeting, and the body corporate will appoint a committee, which is effectively the board of directors, which is up to 7 people, to make sort of day-to-day decisions on an ongoing basis. So that body corporate's the company side of things, committee. Now, one of the things that you're not is a body corporate manager. So, and I suppose management rights sort of emerged in the mid-70s. We're now in our third version of legislation that applies to it. So what you'll find is there's some terminology that's crept across the various incarnations of the legislation. So what you are in a legislative sense is a service contractor to the body corporate and a letting agent. That's what you're called in the Act. But as you bounce around, you'll be called a unit manager, a resident manager, a caretaking service contractor, so on and so forth. You might be called a building manager, but what you're not is a body corporate or strata manager. So a strata manager is the person that really provides secretarial services to the body corporate. So again, like a company, every year there needs to be committee meetings. You know, each committee can choose how many times they want to meet. It's the body corporate manager's job to actually record those minutes, send them out to owners and deal with the body corporate statutory compliance. It's the body corporate manager's job to issue levy to owners, to come up with the budgets, to call the general meetings and those sorts of things. Those administrative services are not what you're coming into in a management rights context. And you'll find there's literally hundreds of strata management companies out there. There's a couple of very big ones that might have 20, 30, 40 staff, and there's down to one-man bands, Higginson strata management, put up my shingle and I'm away. So in a management rights sense, there's far more qualifications required to be a resident manager than there is to be a strata manager. So any single one of you could set up your own body corporate management company tomorrow, no qualifications, no training, no nothing. So in a body corporate sense, you do find that the big guys have fairly good systems and procedures, and whoever their appointed employee is to be the body corporate manager will be an important person in your life. They're someone that you want to get on with, because they will make your life easier and you will make their life easier if you work together in terms of invoice payments, in terms of dealing with committee issues and so on and so forth. The big difference though is that their tenure is no more than 3 years, whereas your tenure in a management rights context will probably be somewhere between 10 and 25. So they quite often are only appointed year by year, so what you'll find is they tend to gravitate towards who they think has the power in a relationship, and you want to get on well with them because they need to make sure they keep getting reappointed. But again, I suppose takeaway, the administrative services are not what you're signing on to do from a management rights context. Spoken about caretaker, letting agent and so on. Other terms you'll hear, general and committee meetings. So the body corporate must have an annual general meeting every year. No ifs, buts or maybes. At that meeting there's a range of statutory motions about setting budgets and making decisions to audit accounts and all those sorts of things. There's also the opportunity for the body corporate to consider whatever else owners want to put up. So that AGM must be held within 3 months of the end of the body corporate's financial year, and that financial year isn't necessarily 30 June, it can be any month of the year. Any general meeting outside that's called an EGM or extraordinary general meeting. So more often than not, a vanilla body corporate will have one AGM a year, the committee will put their hands up and it just continues to roll forward. Committee meetings are where the committee meet to make sort of the day-to-day governance decisions. Each committee is different. From a legislative perspective, you must have an AGM every year, but you don't actually have a statutory minimum number of committee meetings. So again, from a due diligence perspective, one of the things that we look at and go through is sort of give you an indication of what we'd consider the committee to be like, whether they're very active, very inactive, normal. So for me, a normal committee would probably meet once every maybe 4 months, 3 meetings a year. The more hardcore committees, particularly in bigger buildings, might meet monthly. And you do absolutely get buildings where there's not a single committee meeting held throughout the year. So from a due diligence perspective, it's one of those things to look at when you're buying management rights as to what your committee's expectations are likely to be. So for me, if they meet monthly, they're clearly on the game, they're interested in what's going on, which means that your engagement with them is going to be pretty important in terms of how you report and all those sorts of things. If they don't meet at all, then it probably throws a bit more of the onus on you to make or to drive some of the things that they would ordinarily drive, which if you're built that way, it's not a bad place to be either. So again, it's just a matter of understanding the personality of the body corporate you're buying into. A CMS is a community management statement. So that's one consolidated document that deals with all of the bylaws in the body corporate. So the bylaws are the rules that a body corporate can make about how it governs the common property. So the way it works is the legislation sets certain parameters. You can't go outside those. And then once you go into the bylaws, you can make rules around hours for use of the pool, regulations about the keeping of pets, how people are going to deal with common property, real estate signs. In those bylaws will be a couple of special ones that should apply just to management rights. So again, from a due diligence perspective, that's what we look at. It'll also set out the lot entitlements, which are your proportionate share of the body corporate levies. So that's a one-stop document with all of that stuff in it. So one of the roles that you'll have from a caretaking perspective will be to monitor the observance of the bylaws. It's not your job to enforce them, and you will occasionally get committee members that will try to make their problems your problems. We're helping one client at the moment who has been under the misapprehension that it's his job to enforce car parking. So what's been happening is people have been parking in the visitor car parking on a weekly basis, and the committee's gone and belted him and said, go sort them out. So he's gone under the mistaken belief that it's his job, taken those owners on, created significant antagonism when it's actually not his job to do. His job was to report back to the committee and say, Joe Bloggs in Unit 3 has spent a week in the visitor car park, and then it's up to the committee to actually enforce those bylaws. So it's a really important distinction. It's for them to have that fight, not for you. So understanding what's in those bylaws is a pretty important thing, because it's your job to tell the body corporate what's going on, because you're the one that's on site, but it's not your job to enforce them. Very important distinction. One of the big things you will... So the way the legislation works is the Body Corporate and Community Management Act is a headpiece of legislation that has laws that apply to every body corporate. Underneath that, you can have a number of regulation modules. So from a management rights sense, the two big ones are accommodation and standard. There's other regulation modules which are commercial and small schemes, but you very rarely see management rights in those, or those are the odd commercial one lurking around. The big difference from a management rights context is the maximum length of term that your management rights agreement can be for. Under the accommodation module, it's up to 25 years. Under the standard module, it's no more than 10. So at the moment, we're negotiating with body corporates and putting in place agreements under the accommodation module that go to 2040, which is a bloody long time away. And even now, I still get the odd document across my desk from the mid-90s where I've signed it as a witness for the client. And I remember seeing at the time, sort of 2015's forever away, but here we are. So whereas a standard module is capped at 10 years. So certainly that's a big one from a banking perspective, and Damien will talk more about the different contexts there for financing. But as the valuers say, certainty equals value. The longer the term, the better off, the more certainty and more security you have. The last two there are really the two industry organisations that you could choose to be part of from a management rights context. The REIQ is the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. That really is a agent's body, subject to how you go when you get into one of these things. External agents might not necessarily be your friend and probably won't be. The guys and girls from Ray White and LJ Hooker and so on will probably be knocking on your owner's doors, trying to sell units, trying to solicit managements, so they're not necessarily your friends. And that's probably part of what the RAS model was born out of in terms of you being able to be a sales agent, which the guys will talk about later on. The industry body for management rights is the Australian Resident Accommodation Managers Association. So that is the body that you want to become a member of when you purchase management rights. And even now, if you're looking at coming into the industry, it's not a bad one to sign on to, because they have a massive database of resources online that you can read about the industry. And I mean, you're all here today investing time in understanding probably what you're about to buy into. The more reading, that sort of stuff you can do, the better off you are. The other thing I should put on there is our website. I punch out, you'll all get my newsletters after this. I put out a newsletter sort of every fortnight on whatever issues come in across the desk. I've been writing them for probably almost 10 years now. Our website has a complete history of every newsletter we've written. So if you want to do some more reading about the day-to-day stuff that you'll come up against in a management rights context, it's all there on our website. So the last part of this first component for me is what you actually buy. So the vanilla management rights arrangement is a piece of real estate, a caretaking agreement and a letting agreement. There's no hard and fast rules though. They can all be different. And ultimately, a management rights business is really created from the documents that describe it, which is why due diligence in a legal sense is really important, because if those documents aren't any good, the management rights business isn't either. So, but in general terms, what you buy will be a piece of real estate. Pretty simple. It's a lot, has a value. Again, some agreements and setups are different. Some you might buy two lots. There might be a residential lot and there might be an office lot. Some there might just be an office lot. Some particularly, this was a newsletter I wrote sort of 2 weeks ago, might not have any real estate at all, where you might get the right to occupy common property as part of the management rights agreements, in which case you don't have to buy any real estate. But the traditional sense includes that lot, which means you're going to reside on site or own a piece of real estate in the body corporate. The management rights agreements themselves, the standard format really is a caretaking agreement, which is that dollar value for you get paid X dollars to supply services to the body corporate for a fixed period. And the other part is a letting agreement, which is an authorisation for you to let lots on behalf of owners. So one, the caretaking agreement is where you get paid by the body corporate. Under the letting agreement, you get paid by the individual owners that appoint you as their letting agent. So in that context, it's just like a normal rent roll like you would have with a real estate agency. And part of the due diligence is absolutely caretaking and letting agreements from our end. Letting appointments by and large are dealt with by the accountant, and I'll talk a bit more about, well, Sam will certainly talk about what he looks at in those sort of things. But that's the standard structure. So you can have a caretaking and letting agreement in the one document. You do see caretaking agreements, letting agreements, and then additional services agreements. Structurally, they can look different ways, but fundamentally they'll have those same two components. A range of services paid for by the body corporate, the authorisation to let units on behalf of owners. It's the fundamental management rights structure. With the contract, there'll usually be some chattels and equipment, subject to what size of business you're buying. Might include ride-on mowers, little tractors to pull bins up from basements. Might just include some basic gardening equipment, mowers, leaf blowers, whatever it might be. And that depends a little bit on whether the caretaking agreement obliges you or the body corporate to supply caretaking equipment. And to be honest, that's sort of 50-50. Some agreements have the body corporate supplying it, some have you. Either way, it's just a matter of making sure that it's there. And goodwill. So you'll hear a little bit today about this multiplier, 4 times, 5 times, whatever it is. In terms of value, the real estate you can touch and feel, happy days. It's the same as any other piece of real estate you look at. In a management rights sense, that multiplier, or what you're paying for when you buy a management rights business, is goodwill. And that goodwill is effectively the ability to continue to earn that income for the remaining period of the agreements. So if you've got a management rights agreement through to 2040, and it's earning an income of $100,000, and you're buying it on a multiplier of 5, which is effectively a 20% return on investment, that's $500,000 worth of capital value. In essence, that's what you're paying for the right to continue to earn that income for that period. That's about as much as I'll talk about in a valuation sense, but that multiplier is really what you're paying for that right to earn that income. So that's my first bit. So I'll be back later to talk about the actual purchase process. And in the meantime, I think next up would be Damien to talk about banks and their views on management rights, which is one of the, I suppose, survivors in the post-GFC world. Banks all got a little bit twitchy about letting on businesses with goodwill. Banks love hard real estate, but in effect, they all skated through the GFC and continued to lend to management rights, which I suppose is reflective of what they see as a secure industry. So anyway, Damien?